Representative Lipsky.
Hello.
You know our guest. We'll let you two introduce yourselves anyway. And then we've got a few folks sitting around the edges of the room who may be new to the committee. If you would just introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Carla Molander. I work with Katie at Action Circles. I'm on the legislative assistant.
Nice to meet you. Morning, Amy.
Teddy Wozniak.
Morning, Teddy.
No, Anthony, I'm a care community, I'm with representative.
Nice to meet you. Well, so welcome. We're going to hear this morning from the sponsors of the Universal School Meals Bill. And normally, I should just say, normally we would have had you in before we really started taking any testimony in the bill, and we weren't able to make that work with your schedules. We know your committee is very busy. And apologies for that. So we already have I would say we have a pretty good sense of what's in the bill. And would like just to have you share whatever you'd like to share given that.
Great, thanks. And I'm Representative Brady of Williston.
I'm Representative Janet Brown from Richmond.
And we are, sorry, go ahead.
I'd say neighboring district to Erin.
Yes. And we're sponsoring it, but this is by no means just our program or bill. This is a idea and program that's existed in form for a long time. We are simply two more legislators here helping move the baton around the track. So this is no ownership of just our bill by any means. But we did work on it pretty closely last year. So I think it helped us really understand kind of the nuances of the policy and the bigger picture in terms of why it's so important. I'll note I'm also a high school teacher and a school board member, so I bring some sort of school perspective to why I felt like this was so important. There's really, I think, three reasons that this matters and that it's important that we maintain it. And the first is that we know that there was unmet need in our schools in terms of the threshold between students who would actually qualify for free and reduced meals and students who might go hungry. The thresholds are quite low. Pre-pandemic, there was certainly unmet need in our schools. And so that just from an equity and a taking care of kids perspective rises to the top to me as incredibly important. Second, there is no doubt stigma anytime we sort of rank and sort kids. And so in the old system where you had a number or a card and a student on free or reduced had to fill out paperwork, maybe went in a different line in some places, the stigma was real. And even if it wasn't real, it was perceived. Students, young people are incredibly good at knowing anything in terms of differences and that sort of psychological stigma. And for some families, it was not filling out the paperwork because, that felt like I don't want to need to do that. So just the whole kind of atmosphere around really making such a distinction among kids and their economic situations is not good for their well-being for any kids, whether it's the kids who may qualify for the program or the kids who don't. If we can level the playing field, as a teacher, I see everything that we can do that is universal is generally better for everyone. It may not be that everybody needs it, but we use the universal design principle in school all the time because it may be the graphic organizer that I developed for some kids who might need it for organization. It actually ends up benefiting this other group of students. So there's this sort of the universal principle here really helps reduce stigma and create a more cohesive culture. And finally, there's benefits beyond just the financial need. There's the economic benefit to our, to our communities. Schools are some of our biggest restaurants in the state in terms of their purchasing power. And we've got some great evidence from UVM and other studies about the kind of multiplier effect in our economy of school lunches and doing really great work in the state around more local foods on our lunches, which is really exciting. So there's, it has an impact and a benefit beyond just the kids eating, but there's a, ripple effect to our economy as well. And it helps our food service programs plan in a long-term way that they just can't do otherwise. If you're always trying to sort of speculate how many kids are going to eat this or that, versus if you can plan for, you start to get a better sense of, we're going to have roughly this many kids eating the meals. You can do, better bulk purchasing, better planning ahead, better quality. So it really helps improve. And I think this is, we're hearing from the field, like this is going to be a slow process in terms of, some schools are doing really amazing things with their food programs and, others are, have a ways to go. But the more that this is something they can all count on and plan on and focus on and not focus on the bill keeping and the, trying to go back and chase kids for unmet lunch obligations, they're going to be able to focus on the food service planning side of things. So in terms of the overall kind of, why we feel so strongly about this, I think those are the three core reasons. What did I miss?
Yeah. I think I would just add on to that. I think, the Universal School Meals movement, it's been really fascinating and wonderful to see how the coalitions have built around this movement, here in this building across, our committees, the Ed Committee, the Ag Committee, with the advocates who've worked so hard on this push. And I think the testimony that we've heard both this year and last year from school nutrition directors and from students themselves have been really powerful. So, folks may hear a variety of perspectives on this initiative, but when we really think about the folks who are most directly impacted on the ground, the students, the teachers, the teams, the nutrition directors at schools who are working on this program, I think we've heard really overwhelming evidence that it's just been such a powerful team building moment. And I think, particularly as we're sort of moving out of the more intense phases of the pandemic, that need for sort of community and that sort of rebuilding that sense of community in our schools. I feel like this program has been a really important part of that.
I will say only anecdotally, but when I was in the classroom this fall and visiting schools in my district as well, I always polled students when I did a little sort of how does government work and gave them this as a case study and asked them to give me feedback about the Universal Meals Program. And having polled hundreds of students, well over 90% were absolutely, yes, we should keep it. Yes, we should keep it. I don't need it. My family doesn't need it, but it's important. I want my classmates to be able to eat. I see as a high school teacher a lot, students coming from Representative Levitt's district, they get on the bus at 6:15 in the morning for classes at 7:45. They have not had breakfast. They're not, whether it's financial need or not, just the sort of harried, stressful nature of family life these days. And a lot of single parent families, kids are coming to school not having eaten. So by 11 o'clock in the morning, they've been up for hours. They are so hungry. So the ability to get lunch and also breakfast, that we've seen a great uptake in breakfast, makes such a difference in students' engagement and learning. And there's a lot of reasons kids come to school hungry,
And it's
a lot of our kids travel a long ways to get to schools.
A lot of our kids like to sleep late.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our
As
schools,
late as possible.
well, and our schools start really early. Some of our schools start
Yeah.
really, really early,
Yeah.
which is not great for them biologically either.
Committee questions, Representative Lipsky.
Thank you, and I apologize for being almost late. You're preaching the faithful on this bill, so I'll put that aside. But you spoke of a notion called universal design principle, and I've served on school boards but I care how that is used with regard to food service meals versus other educational programs. Like, explain that principle.
Well, I think a little bit in what we were just talking about, that, a program that might have its sort of core purpose in making sure that we feed students who are hungry and who may not be able to afford it or may have financial needs. There are other reasons students are hungry at school. They get up so early, they have to travel so far. They're just between the threshold of what would qualify. A whole host of reasons are there's no doubt families are stressed and particularly in the last few years with COVID and, and the economy, families are stressed. I've also heard from a lot of families saying, we don't qualify and need it, but this really helps our grocery budget and our family budget in terms of being able to know, we can focus on feeding the kids dinner or breakfast and dinner, but lunch is going to be taken care of at school. And that really helps us in terms of our month to month budgeting. So I think of the universal principle of that being that, it's meeting needs in a bunch of different ways, even though it might have had an original purpose. It was really about
A
student.
bunch of stratums.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Senator Bryce?
So one piece that you touched on a little bit and that we have come to understand just in hearing testimony is the idea that that meal programs in general are really great in terms of quality in some districts and less great in other districts or other schools. And that often is based on, you know, a specific personality that's in the district that really cares or is really good or has connections and resources or background. And so I'm wondering if in your work over the past couple of years in this in general and then on this bill this year, if you've come across any thoughts or ideas how to address that, how to sort of address the capacity and level the playing field across the
This kid wants to.
landscape of schools so that that's less of an issue and the quality level is increasing in all schools.
We have room for one more
Yeah, we do.
because of Charles' opinion.
It's a great question. I would defer a little bit to, you know, to the field and to the nutrition directors and, you know, we've had that conversation with them as well, that hope as this becomes a hopefully permanent fixture that they can count and plan on. The other reality is it's been very unpredictable. I mean, we started doing universal meals at the national level during COVID and said, you know, the federal government's going to cover meals because we don't want anyone to go hungry. That looked like a lot of different things. A lot of it was bagged lunches. You know, the quality wasn't necessarily great, but we were living, you know, this is like during lockdown. Then, you know, the federal government extended it for a year. So a lot of schools sort of, okay, I guess we're still doing this. That was the hybrid year in schools. So kids had to sit, you know, 6 feet apart. They didn't sit in the lunchroom. Food got delivered to the classroom. So that meant, you know, it had been prepared an hour earlier. It had to be prepackaged. Like it was not, we've been operating in all these sort of not quite ideal or real scenarios. Like this year's the first year we're kind of in a normal and it's only the first year. So, you know, I think what we're hearing and I trust is that it's going to take a little time for the system. If we make this permanent, you know, they can fully get rid of the sort of bookkeeping cash register part of it, plan for food, collaborate with each other. If we can really do more on the local purchasing incentive and on the local foods programs, like that over time, those things are going to start to seep out to the system better. But, you know, I think it's, you know, something to ask of our school nutrition directors and that community of how they can better share those resources. But I think there's some great leadership in our state that hopefully will, you know, continue to move us that way. But I understand they haven't really had stability of any sort, and they've been operating in these really, you know, erratic conditions, including this year because yeah, it's new. And this year, even like this fall, when we really wanted to get data about how many kids are eating, has been helpful. But, you know, the sort of everything that people didn't have during COVID hit schools in the fall, and the rates of absences and illnesses, you know, schools were closing because they didn't have enough teachers sometimes to staff classrooms. So, you know, that's hit cafeterias, that's hit. So, you know, we're getting closer to normal, but this year's had its own challenges too. So yeah. I think it's going to take some time to see that. You know, we heard really great testimony from Harley Sterling, yes. You know, who is a great leader in this about like we just need a little time of stability and knowing what the future is going to bring to be able to plan for this.
Yeah. And their network is really energized
yes.
around this.
Yes.
Like they have a very cohesive group that's helping develop strategies, you know, statewide in Harley's district is sort of a standout, but they definitely want to help others, particularly around the local foods incentives.
Representative O'Brien?
For the first time yesterday, we heard potential funding sources for this. And since you're sort of living with this, or you've lived it a lot longer than we have, do you have any thoughts about those different, you know, maybe like 4 or 5 potential options? If that even matters, like it's just like, let's find money for this, but or do you feel more like it should have a really dedicated funding source like a tax on the cloud or sweetened drinks?
Luckily, that's Ways and Means job. I think it's very clear from schools that it can't be at the local level. We can't say you have to offer universal meals and now it's part of your budget process. Obviously, if it's part of the ed fund, we live in a, you know, statewide education fund, so there is some impact there. But I think it's important that it isn't at the local level. And last year we funded it out of the Ed Fund. Ultimately, that will be a decision for Ways and Means. I think there's kind of arguments about both ways of where it could come from. But I'm heartened to see, our estimates have been, I think there was fear, like, what if we just blow the roof off and, it's like $70 million. Our estimates were very close. We appropriated 29 million last year, and they think it's going to come in at about 27 million in terms of expenses this year. And that's looking, again, don't know for sure, but looking fairly stable in the near future. So I think that's really hopeful. We aren't totally, we're pretty well dialed in on what this might actually cost. And we're hopefully going to reap some benefits of some federal changes that are going to actually, because we designed the program in a way to absolutely maximize the federal funding, it's going to only help us as the federal funding increases. And so there's a chance it will even bring the cost down over time. But that's a good question for Ways and Means.
I think we've got some good ideas on the table.
Representative Levitt.
Yes.
I'm just curious, where do you all feel like this bill needs the most support?
Good question. I think it's really important that we're all unified around the policy of it. And I think we've heard from so many different corners, school communities, parents, advocates, teachers, school nutrition directors. I think, just like really tuning into what that coalition is telling us in terms of the impact that this is having on the ground.
Other questions? Representative O'Brien.
One thing we talked about, and you just mentioned, the local food initiatives. It's not in the bill at the moment, really. Do you want some element of this bill to include that, or even targets on that?
The funding source?
Not so much
The local-
funding, just how
foods.
much local food we
Farm to school.
I would say that that's no longer in their hands.
Sorry, you have the
I
bill.
have opinions.
Yes.
Yeah, you're welcome to share your opinion.
My sense is that there may be more support for funding some of the local foods aspects through our agriculture department and then through our education department, but also as our education department that has to administer the program. This gets into some things I can't quite, I'm not sure how to work out at the state level, but, certainly I think there's it's, the new jurisdiction of your committee, a little bit of a challenge here about really this is in many ways about food, but yet it has to be administered in schools and federal rules require certain things. So there's kind of jurisdictional things between the AOE and the Agency of Agriculture.
To that point, we've had lots of discussion about the bill and other ways that we might improve the bill.
Sure.
And one of the things that's come up a couple of times, and it really crosses back over into your committee's jurisdiction, is the amount of time that students have to eat lunch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we've only heard anecdotally, for sure, about this, but what we've heard is not enough time.
Yep.
At 20 minutes or 25 minutes, which seems, especially if you're standing in a line, we know what it's like to stand in a line and
That's true.
not have enough time to actually eat. So I pass that along. You're a teacher, you mentioned as well, Representative Brady. So, and I'm not sure what level what grade level you teach, but it's something that has come up often enough that I don't know whether we'll pursue that or not.
Okay. There's interest in our committee as well, I think, and there is concern out there, and it varies among schools a lot. So I think I'd want to get a little more feedback from the education community around what are all the factors that are playing into how long our lunches are and how long they are on paper versus what our kids' actual experience is. Because I think we've heard very different things in different places. So how to come about that, as soon as you start to touch school schedules, it sort of has this massive ripple effect on about 10,000 things. But it's certainly a valid issue. And we've heard that as more kids are taking it, the lines are longer and that, decreases the time that they have to eat. There is something in the bill regarding allowing time spent that kids are eating can be counted as instructional time, and that I don't completely, I'm going to defer to the field a little bit on the breakfast piece, but like this idea of breakfast after the bell, that you can serve breakfast after the start of the school day, and it can count as instructional time. I think schools are grappling with how to do that. I've seen that at my school. It's, great in principle, trying to figure out how you don't have 600 high school students all going lining up to get bagels during their first mod class. So there's some challenges to be worked out. But again, I do think that the consistency of knowing this is going to be the way we do food in schools, so that school nutritionists can plan, principals can plan, they can really say, okay, this is a schedule thing we've got to consider now, is hopefully going to help create a little bit smoother system in a lot of our schools.
I just want to pause. I know we've got some other questions, but we also have some visitors who've joined us since we started. And
Can we also let the other little visitors in, because there just aren't that many of them, and I don't know, they're just.
we,
They have a half person volume. Third person volume.
So let me just say welcome to those of you who are in the room at the moment, and would you care to introduce yourself and your?
Sure. We are from Vermont Day School in Shelburne, and we are working on a global studies project about food insecurity. And how do we do on homework? You did such a nice job in the hallway. I'm the administrator, so I'm not as in tune with their teachers in the hallway and that's their class. Does anyone want the spotlight?
So we don't want to put anybody in the uncomfortably in the spotlight. We do have, I know there's some other folks, other students and teachers that would the committee object if they all joined us for a few minutes anyway?
No.
No objection here.
No, because if you my equalized student,
Here's their teacher. She can probably answer better the whole, the larger reason why they're here today.
Sure. So every year our school does a food drive that benefits the Shelburne Food Shelf, which is amazing, but we thought that was a really good opportunity to take a deeper dive into food insecurity and what are some of the root causes, and not just, food shelves are great, but they're not a solution. So we then started learning about some different policies and programs that are in place, not to just help people in need for a moment, but really make change. And one of the folks from Hunger Free Vermont, Mariana Sears, I'm sure people here know her, came and gave a whole presentation about universal school meals. And it just really hit home for a lot of us because we're a school and we are kids. So we wanted to learn more and learn ways that we could get involved, like signing supporter cards or writing to legislators. So it's a really cool opportunity for us to see stuff in action.
Well, you came on a good day because we're actually talking about school meals, as you probably picked up from listening in over the last few minutes. And we're very excited that you're interested enough in our committee to have outside the doorway. You're welcome to stay and listen. And I think maybe there are a few other questions for the witnesses who may not have much longer to stay with us. I know you've already given us half hour and your committee probably is hoping you'll be back. But Representative O'Brien.
I just thought, Chair, that if you describe to these guys who these two are, why they're here.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Sure.
So we happen to have with us today two of our colleagues who are in the Education Committee visiting to testify on the bill that they sponsored and introduced, the Universal School Meals Bill. So we started out by asking them to just tell us why they were interested in the bill. We've already heard quite a bit of testimony on the bill, so they're not walking through it in detail, but they're explaining why they think it's important. And then the committee is asking them questions to drill down a little bit more into why they think it's important. And maybe try and change the bill a little bit if we think that's a good idea. And typically what will happen is we'll talk about it. We'll make some changes over the course of the next week or so. We'll vote on it, and then we'll send it to the entire House to vote on. And so, without getting into government and politics, that's a little bit of legislative 101. Representative Lipsky.
And a follow-up on our chairman's explanation. Our door says government operations, but that's mislabeled. We at the table, except for the two representatives at that end, are members of the Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee. So this is a universal school meals is a big concern for us. Food sustainability in our state and where it's sourced from, meaning does it come from local farms in Charlotte or Shelburne or Montpelier or Cabot matters to us. So that's why we are appreciative of these education committee members coming to us to dialogue with us. So we work together as a body to try to solve problems and challenges for everyone in the state. And you young folks are our biggest motivator. You represent our future, so all the hope in the world rests with you and your teachers, so.
No pressure, no pressure.
Thank you for being here.
Does anybody else have a question for our witnesses? Yes, Representative Cole.
Hello, thank you for being here. I have a question, I think it came up in Education Committee as well, relating to some folks' concern about translating this to very, very small schools versus large, versus, of course, there's language about independent, which I think you've pledged out pretty well in how it would work. And then it also ties into this exemption piece being cut out at the very end, which I think might have had to do primarily with smaller population schools wanting to opt out of programs like these. So just thinking about like talking points around that and how we can.
If I'm recalling correctly, there were only one or two schools that were in that kind of opt-out situation pre the state doing universal meals. And they have been able, and Rosie could probably answer this really well, they've been able to work out a way in those one or two schools to be able to be folded into the program. So how they administer that specifically in some of the smaller schools would be a great question for her, but I think that Marion Cross and like one other that had an exemption, and they have somehow worked that out so that they can offer the meals program. I think it was an issue of like a kitchen on site, or again, Rosie knows that one really well, but yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting us. Right.
We'll let you go.
Great. Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Third floor.
Hey,
Tracks all the way up to the third floor.
You have all the steps on this committee.
That's right. Thank you to our visitors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome to come sit in the education committee
come and
room
visit us.
too on your tours today. I'll leave
A little more room down there.
Yes, there's a little more room. I'll leave a copy of the bill with you.
What grade were you guys?
You're 4th and 5th grade.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Page that just came in?
Yeah, I was wondering about.
Child labor.
Yeah.
Okay, we're adjourned.